So yeah, let me introduce you to Florian. And for those that have just made it into the Zoom room, my name's Steph. You may not have met me before, but I'm the director for Bamba, and I have been for about 2 or 3 years now. And the MWC is a subsidiary, a partner of Bamba. It's a part of the organisation that we acquired 2 or 3 years ago. So that's the link between the two brands, in case you weren't aware. So yeah, it's really good to have you here. Let me just do a short introduction, as I said, and then we'll hand over to Florian to take over the session. So for those that you don't know Dr. Florian, Florian's a consultant psychiatrist at the Maudsley Hospital, which is based in London, but he's also a trainer and a supervisor in CBT, cognitive-based behavioural therapies, and mindfulness, and is the lead actually for Maudsley Mindfulness Services, and been delivering mindfulness-based cognitive therapy to groups and to patients, individuals with chronic depression and anxiety problems for more than 15 years now, so extremely experienced. Florian's also running an MBCT-based program to improve compassion and well-being and resilience in junior doctors, which I find extraordinary, and I think particularly since our COVID times, I'm sure that's become hugely helpful and insightful. And during the pandemic, as I've just talked to COVID, Florian initiated the Mindfulness for All. Some people may know it as M for All, which is a live online program which focuses on the health of staff in that kind of supportive field. Florian is the London lead of a randomised, controlled, multi-centre trial investigating the impact of mindfulness on patients with CBT, resistant depression in IAPT, and also teaches global mental health, cognitive behavioural therapy and MBCT on 2 MSc courses in London and Heidelberg. And then finally, I think it's worth saying, because this is quite notary, published in the areas of MBCT, EUPD, schema therapy and anxiety and depression. So a brilliant profile and CV. And yeah, on no further note, I'm going to hand over to Florian, who's going to take our session today, which is focusing on emotional climate change and mindfulness. Thank you so much, Florian, for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a great privilege to be here. I hope none of you is a psychoanalyst. Is anybody a psychoanalyst among you? If you are, don't worry, you can come forward, because you know, I have to admit, part of this talk I have given before to a group of psychoanalysts, you know, a year and a half ago. So I don't want you to be, you know, repeating it too much. But no, you haven't heard this talk before, and I've modified it slightly. So even if you've heard it before, then, you know, stay in, because I have updated the talk. So it's lovely to see you. I'm going to share my screen. And I'll hope that will work, because it's always a challenge. Yeah, I think this should be working here. Can you see? So global emotional climate change, could mindfulness save the world? Yeah, I mean, it's a tiny bit tongue-in-cheek, I have to say, when I put the title up, because there's 2 components which I'd like to say when people talk about global climate change, we obviously think about more atmospheric change, and think about, you know, the contents of the atmosphere, which is the physical atmosphere that's surrounding us, being, you know, filled with fumes and glasshouse, you know, sort of gases, you know. But when I'm talking about climate change, I'm thinking about the emotional atmosphere around us. How has the emotional atmosphere changed? I'm, as a psychiatrist and as a cognitive therapist, have got a particular interest in the emotions around us and how the emotions are being shaped around us. So I thought, you know, I take a certain interest in it, because I have noticed, I'm sure you have as well, sort of a climate change, you know, as well as in the physical atmosphere, as well as in the emotional atmosphere. And then I'm asking the question, you know, could mindfulness save the world? You know, tongue in cheek. We don't want to be too grandiose about mindfulness. We all know mindfulness has a very substantial impact. But I'm still asking the question, what else could we do if not mindfulness? So this is just my little introduction to the title. Oh, now how do I move this forward? Yeah. As Steph has already very kindly introduced me, and I'd like to say that apart from being a mindfulness teacher, I'm also a schema therapy teacher. Any of you that might have come across schema therapy, it's an integrative therapy of a lot of different therapies that we use, mainly to deal with perhaps longer term personality changes, or borderline personality disorder. And I will come back to this in a moment, why I think this might also be relevant for us. It's very much about emotional regulation. And as you may all agree, as mindfulness teachers and mindfulness fans, mindfulness can help us to regulate emotions. And so when we think about mindfulness saving the world from the global emotional climate change, I want to basically introduce a little bit to some aspects of schema therapy as well. I'm sort of, before I go into the next slide, I'm really sort of making you aware that I will also hope that we'll have a bit of time to ask questions at the end. There will also be a time for what I hope will be a little mindfulness practice that I've sort of specifically targeted towards the talk, and give you a bit of an overview, but also will introduce you a little bit to how we do science and how we actually know what the truth is. So bear with me, I'm going to cover a lot of ground. This is sort of, I don't know if you can see in the background here, there's a guy that with his facial expression already points us towards perhaps emotional climate change. Here comes, we see his face, and on his face we already see something that makes us a bit sort of uncomfortable, doesn't it? It's a sort of a half smile, but not really. And he may be just the face of what we're talking about, the climate change that's happening, the emotional climate change. There's another guy that you've met before. We've also got somebody who's changing the emotions around us quite powerfully. And the emotion I'm mainly going to talk about is the emotion of anger that may have changed. I'm putting righteous anger as question mark. We all have our personal opinions about wrong anger versus right anger, but he definitely stands for perhaps making anger an emotion that is much more sort of acceptable, righteous, and perhaps even needed. So just sort of introducing you a little bit to the topic by introducing two characters that you've all come across on your travels. Then there's another character. He promised us 350 million a week for the NHS. Now, I'm still waiting for that, I may say. Doctors are still fighting for their salaries to be upgraded. I always like to say my study leave budget 20 years ago when I joined as a consultant, about 20 years, was £750. Now shout out how much my study leave budget is today as we speak. Shout out a number. It was 750 20 years ago. How much is it now?
750.
Wow. Yeah. So the 350 millions are well needed, because I've lost 30-40% of my income, and that's why consultants have gone on strike. There's a certain amount of anger among the consultant body over this. We hope, try to hold this together very well, but I'm just telling you, talking about righteous, irritation, anger, just to give you a bit of a sense. Also perhaps this particular character whose name is now slipped my mind, can't remember his name anymore. He also was driving perhaps more, driving and thriving on anger. Now, when we talk about anger, sometimes we like to look at perhaps how do we actually know that anger has increased? We could all say, well, Florian's making this up. He just wants to make a talk and wants to introduce mindfulness to believe something doesn't exist. Now, can you see my laser pointer here? Is that visible? Gallup Global Emotions Report, lovely report. I may recommend it to you if you ever want to sort of look at how the world feels. Has basically sort of, you know, we've got, you know, people in Palestine, Iraq experiencing significant amounts of anger, and that was even before anything happened in that region. Assaults on London transport has gone up by 25%. You know, that was about probably, you know, 4 or 5 years ago now. RSE motoring report 5 years ago, 3 out of 10 drivers witnessed physical abuse on the road in the previous year. Now, just to give us a little bit of sense, something's happening. There is a climate change, isn't there? Something's in the air, you know. And as sort of Barbara Rosenwein, who wrote a book about anger, says that maybe it's been sort of considered almost like something we should all endorse more. Perhaps we should be more angry. You know, it's become virtuous to be angry, and that's definitely a change. Let's see if I can do this now. Does this work? Yeah. So when we look at more detail, more Americans were more angry last year than most years in the past. And we see that that still, you know, that other countries, particularly the ones that have been through quite a lot of wars, you know, or trauma, like Armenia, as you may all know, Armenia still recovering, you know, emotionally from genocide that happened 100 years ago, but unrecognized, unaccepted, is creating a lot of anger, and also they are in conflict with a neighboring republic, and that can cause anger. So what part of the societies, you know, sort of younger Americans seem to be more stressed, and you know, so it's different parts of society, particularly around you know, when we kind of lowest income Americans seem to be experiencing more stress and more anger around it. 7 out of 10 Americans in the poorest 20% experience stress the previous day, and when you wealthy, then you experience less stress. So just to be also aware that it's not only where you are, but also where you are on the level of society that you're exposed to more stress, and that may be driving anger. But the anger is not only dependent on the economy. You know, we've had growth in the economy since 2018, but still there are more negative experiences among Americans. So it's not the economy. Yeah, it's something else. You know, the question is, what might that be? And well, you know, you may not be surprised. You might find out our hypothesis about this in a moment. So economy only tells half of the story. Poverty doesn't explain anger. And there's more negative emotion in the States than during the US recession years. Now, this is also an interesting study that I'm putting to you. It's called the World Happiness Study by the WHO. If you ever want to look it up, you know, it comes out every year. It's a very interesting study to read. Most countries, I may say, get happier, but there's one particular country among others that gets less happy, and yet again, it's in the United States. We see a drop in happiness, and that drop is ongoing. And it's not only the general happiness, but also particularly among teenagers. I'm going to go back to that in a moment. We know that there is a sort of drop in happiness in teenagers. So we're not only looking at anger, but also in happiness levels, they're going down. So there is a global trend of change. Now, I'm pointing you towards what may be going on, you know, so the WHO, you know, had this little graph here. These are the internet hours spent on the internet, while the hours spent sleeping the hours spent in personal interaction, and the happiness level overall are going down. The internets are going up among teenagers, surely among ourselves. This is an interesting study. Jonathan Haidt has written a very interesting book. If you have got any contact with children, any way related to bringing up children and wondering why there's a mental health crisis among children, Jonathan Haidt has written a very, very good book, and he talks about the anxious generation, looking at how since 2008, 2010, when the iPhone came along, there seems to be a 61% increase in boys' depression since 2010, and 145% increase in girls' unhappiness since 2010. And he basically clearly states that's not explained by economic changes or by lack of parenting or effort from the parents. We notice from previous studies that social media use does have an influence on, reduced sleep rates. We saw that social comparison and lower self-esteem in mothers that use online media when they're actually comparing themselves to what other mothers are doing. And it seems like when we're more passively consuming social media, our happiness and well-being goes down. So all these are, little studies are coming up, creating a suspicion. We know that globally anxiety levels are up. People with confining friendships are actually down. And yet again, among teenagers, we also can measure stress levels going up, with cortisol being a proxy measure of stress, and those levels are up. Facebook addiction, we now know that social media have got an addictive quality, and that addictive quality doesn't make us happy, like most addictions don't make us happy. Where's my... Yeah, that's it. I find it always fascinating as a doctor to basically think that in the olden days, the guys, when they reached a sort of more senior level, like Berlusconi's and the Putins, they used to go for plastic surgery and Botox and fillers and all the rest of it. Nowadays, it's teenagers using that in order to improve their image. Wow. And we've got, as I talked about, the addictive quality of social media, the neurophysiology of cocaine addiction is very similar for those of us who basically want to see the hard data from, physiological studies. We know it's got a very similar quality to cocaine addiction. Now, this is where we're coming to, how might that happen? And, what we're actually noticing, that this global emotional climate change, perhaps more, an angry climate around, it sounds like it is contagious, so we're actually absorbing anger through our eyes. And, how does that happen? Amplification of moral outrage is a clear consequence of social media's business model, which optimize user engagement. So what the social media companies are trying to do is they're trying to basically engage with them and spend our attention with them, spend our attention and energies on social media. And so they want us to engage, not only by looking at it, but if we can, sharing it. So in doing that, we were then sharing the emotion, and the social media don't just reflect on what's happening in society. We might argue, oh well, if there's anger, social media just reflects the anger. It doesn't actually have got anything to do with it. It just reflects the anger. But no, it's more sinister than that, because social media encourages the sharing of material, and what do we share? Things that make us angry, and that's why they're encouraging tweets. In the olden days, we used to call them tweets. Nowadays, I don't know what they're called, X's or whatever they call it. I don't know. You know, so we get rewards for sharing angry material. So let me go and get my cursor back. There we go. So yeah. So here we are. You know, we know that anger is increasing. Anger is increasing across societies. Anger is increasing worldwide. It's not dependent on the economy. It is very much linked to our use of how we use our eyes, where we spend our attention, and most of us, and particularly teenagers, spend their attention on social media. So I want to talk a little bit about my experience with anger as a schema therapist to really just sort of make us think a little bit, well, what is anger? What's the problem with anger? Is there any problem with anger? Maybe it's okay to be angry. So yeah, I like to say, you know, in my interactions with patients, I like to say anger is one of the many emotions we have. You know, some people call it a sort of a core emotion. Darwin, when he first described, you know, evolution of emotions, also made it one of the 5 core emotions. So anger is a feeling, but all feelings also have a strong physiological component. So that means they are manifesting in our bodies, and they've got an intentional and a behavioral component. So angry action. Yeah. So we need to distinguish between feeling anger and doing anger. So all emotions have got a behavioral imperative quality to them. And normally we experience, evolutionarily speaking, anger in response to a perceived threat. And remember, for human beings, threats are not only saber-toothed tigers or, you know, snakes or, you know, sort of big mammals, but, you know, we are social animals. The most threatening sort of mammal that we have is the one that has got 2 legs. You know, that's the most threatening mammal that we have, that walks on 2 legs. Fellow human beings are probably, both physically and emotionally, most threatening. The emotion of anger is also culturally bound. Remember, we express our anger differently across cultures. So, you know, for those of us who come from a Mediterranean background, we know that, or South American background, where I spend a lot of time in life, we do anger differently in those particular regions of the planet than, for example, here in this country. I personally kind of got a German background. In Germany, we do anger differently. You know, we were much more expressive about anger. So all emotions are also culturally bound. So within a certain cultural realm, we express anger differently. Now, I'm going to go back to my schema work that I alluded to at the beginning. We talk about core biological needs in schema therapy, and schema therapy very much about meeting core sort of biological, emotional needs that people have that are not met in childhood. And we used to talk about 5 core needs. Nowadays we talk about 7 core needs, among them playfulness and expressing our emotions and attachment needs and setting limits. But there's 2 new needs that we have found that are probably more biologically based. So they're based in evolution, and that's the need for fairness. Yeah, and I think it's really important for us to understand that the need for fairness is not just a sort of bit of an add-on. You know, fairness and the need for justice and fairness is not just a sort of a little bit of a societal sort of, you know, progressive need. It's a core biological need. And why do we know this? We know it because we see it in animals as well. There's a lot of social animals that do actually express anger when they feel they're being treated unfairly. So there's monkeys that show anger when they're being treated unfairly. There's ravens that show a sense of fairness. So the need to be treated fairly is very, very biological. We also see it developmentally in young children. They develop a very early sense of fairness. So, so we found out a little bit about sort of anger as a biological need. Sorry, I've got a feline here who's basically trying to eat some food that I've just brought. Hey, sorry about that. Need to set limits here. Now, I like to basically sort of see how can we use anger as an emotion that is helpful to us. Give me 1 second. I just need to kind of just 10 seconds just to. So she was just tucking into some food I brought. Apologies. So, so taking an interest in anger. So let's presume anger exists. How do we actually feel, or how do we actually? What's anger useful for? Yeah. So. So, you know, I like to say, well, anger can be expressed in a very explosive way. And, you know, I mean, that's very useful for, you know, situations like the one I've put here on the photo as a symbolized photo when we obviously want to destroy something. Yeah, it's obviously the anger that we don't like to have around a lot because it leaves total destruction. You know, so anger can be an extremely destructive emotion and extremely hurtful and you know, an emotion that does leave almost nothing behind. You know, I sometimes like to say to myself and others that, you know, we could all lose our job within 30 seconds by being angry, couldn't we? We all know how that would look like if we just exploded. You know, and we really let it out, and when we will leave a lot of destruction behind. Explosive anger can obviously be extremely toxic. But then, you know, so let's presume we don't explode. What else can we do? And this is sort of what I like to say. Anger can be when we moderate it and we sort of contain it and we somehow put it in a place where it can sort of be a driving force, be an energy that actually can lead to change. And an energy that can lead to something positive. You may have, this is just a metaphor, you may have very varying opinions about nuclear energy. I'm just giving it as a metaphor in comparison to a nuclear bomb. Explosive anger versus moderated anger, it can lead to something positive, and it can lead to something creative, and it can be a good energy. So I like to say anger in the right dose can be a fuel to moderate change. So we shouldn't dismiss anger as something that's inherently toxic, but we perhaps should see anger as something that can be useful if used in the right way. Now, obviously, we like to argue that the anger has gone too high, and that's why we've got global emotional climate change. There's too much anger around. The anger that we're nowadays seeing is not moderated anymore. It's sort of explosive. So now the question is, how can mindfulness help? Can mindfulness save the world from that? And I'd like to say, well, maybe, yeah, and you will all have your own opinions about that in a moment, but we know that mindfulness can work. Anybody shout out this guy's name? Anybody wants to shout out his guy's name? His name is here up here.
John Kabat-Zinn.
Yeah, John Kabat-Zinn, hooray. Anybody who knows this guy?
No.
Aaron Beck.
Aaron Beck, absolutely. You can see it here in small letters. He's the inventor of cognitive behavioral therapy, and these guys came along. Anybody remembers these guys?
Mark Williams.
Mark Williams, who's that?
On the right.
Yeah, so Mark Williams, we've got here. Who's this guy?
Teasdale.
Teasdale.
Dindal Seagull in his younger days. So they brought together, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy from Aaron Beck and John Kabat-Zinn's work around MBSR to create MBCT. That's the life that the world I find myself in. Now, if you ever come to one of my talks, I will always bring up this slide. You know, this is a slide that I bring up in all my talks. Forgive me for that, because it's such an important question. Yeah. So if mindfulness could save the world, well, how would it do it, and how would we know that it does it? How would we actually know that things work? And I always like to basically kind of sort of whoever I talk to really remind ourselves of how do we actually know what the truth is. This is a guy from Germany, Immanuel Kant, who basically asked himself a question. You know, he basically asked himself the question: how do we know the truth? And he asked the question: what can I know? Yeah, and then he asked some other questions. You know, what can I hope for? What shall I do? You know, so that's ethics. And then what makes a human being? I think it's a wonderful way of asking questions about when we think about mindfulness, you know, because mindfulness ultimately brings us back to what makes a human being, but also, you know, what do we know about mindfulness and how do we know the truth? We call that epistemology, and there's generally three ways of knowing the truth. You know, one is eminence-based. Anybody has got a sense of what eminence-based means? Shout it out if you've got a suspicion what my eminence-based means. Experience. Yeah, experience. So that might be experience of whom?
Selves. Somebody we admire.
Somebody we admire, yeah? So there's the eminence-based, you know, truth is experience from somebody we admire, absolutely. And then there's the one that we know from ourselves. That's called what we call the existentially based truth. We know it works because we feel it. And then there's the evidence-based. Yeah, and that's probably what, you know, when we kind of do science. So yeah, so eminence-based, someone we admire said so, you know, so this guy said so, or this guy said so, and so we know this feels like the truth. We admire them in some shape or form. It feels like the truth. Then there's the existentially based truth, you know, this is Søren Kierkegaard, you know, who basically created existentialism, and he said, well, no, we don't listen to anybody else, we listen to ourselves. Yeah, and that's how we know the truth. And then we've got evidence-based, you know, more associated with John Locke, who basically said, well, no, we need to find out the truth through randomized controlled trials. And when we do mindfulness, I like to say, and I hope you agree with me, we use all three channels. Yeah, we use our channel of, yes, we have got people that we believe are really telling us something that, you know, points towards the truth. You know, for me, it was John Kabat-Zinn many years ago and Mark Williams. You may have another teacher that you feel is speaking to you. We all have found out through meditation that it works for us. So we've got this existential evidence, you know, that mindfulness works, and then we've got the evidence that supports that through science. Now, we can do that a bit later, the mindfulness practice. I just want to perhaps just stay with. So these guys also were probably using all three channels. You know, they admire John Kabat-Zinn's work. They thought he's got something to say, but then they said, well, and they tried it out themselves. You know, they all meditated, saying, well, this is working for me. Now let's do a trial. Yeah. So they went through the three steps: eminence-based, existentially based, evidence-based. And now we are really, really lucky because we've got the evidence base from, you know, that mindfulness works from, you know, the NICE and the NICE guidance. NICE, for you, though, for those of you who don't know NICE so well, NICE basically puts all the evidence together. They've got a whole group of people, you know, health economists, statisticians. They interview, you know, stakeholders. They talk to specialists. They really go a long way to demonstrate that something works. Yeah, so they're very much around the evidence base, and then they make recommendations out of the evidence base, and they call those, you know, health technology appraisals. Yeah, so mindfulness being a health technology, and then they make recommendations, and hopefully we will follow those recommendations as health professionals. But I may say, because you're in the workplace, it does also apply to us, from the workplace. So, what do they actually check? What's the highest level of evidence we have is what we call the randomized controlled trials or systematic reviews, so meta-analysis. The lowest level of evidence is the expert opinion, because I say so. Animal research also is fairly low evidence base, but it works. So yeah, and this is why I like to present this to you, because we've got nice guidance about the workplace. We've got evidence that mindfulness works in the workplace, and it says we should offer employees mindfulness, yoga, or meditation on an ongoing basis, best delivered in group, but also a combination of two, either online or in person. But I'm asking the question, how can mindfulness help with anger? Yeah, and so we've got a little bit of evidence that mindfulness also works for anger, and particularly when we do a mindfulness practice, which we're going to do in a moment. There's this particular study, Ruth Bear, some of you may know, is very much associated with creating evidence for mindfulness, and they also showed that anger often is driven by angry rumination, angry sort of repetition of angry thoughts in our minds. I don't know if you've come across that. When you feel treated unfairly, you've been your rights you've been deprived of your rights. You go through it. Why did this happen? This was so unfair. This is so mean. I shouldn't have happened to me. This is so mean. All of us have been through, injustice, and I presume that all of us have experienced injustice across our lives. The mind can't let go. Because it's such a strong drive towards having justice and having fairness. And so Ruth Bear and her colleagues basically showed that that's what's happening. We go over and over again, and this makes us more likely to be angry, and then we explode. These guys from China, Mr. Liu and colleagues, they also showed that people that are more angry are more likely to send angry messages online. So the disinhibition risk factor is there. We're already in angry rumination. We're already, this is so mean, the government is so bad, this guy is so bad, and now this guy is writing these idiotic messages. I'm just going to show him. And then we write an online message. And so thinking about how to basically reduce that, it may be through mindfulness. Yeah, and here we've got, again, the recommendations from NICE with regards to employees that are of poor mental health risks. So that applies to a lot of my doctors. We're all at more higher risk for developing mental health problems. They offer, they recommend mindfulness training. Nice. And this is for depression, just for your interest. Nice recommendations on depression. So it also works for depression. Mindfulness for health professionals, so just put that, as a meta-analysis, mindfulness reduced distress, anxiety, depression in the workplace and healthcare professionals, and it also reduces biologically measurable things in people like cortisol levels, immune response to vaccinations. We can show in the workplace if we give people mindfulness, it does actually change those levels of stress. So I'm leaving you with this. I wanted to show you a little meditation practice that others have suggested. Before we finish and before we get feedback, I just want you to stand up in your chair for a moment. So get out of your chair if you can. And we're doing a standing meditation together. I'm standing here as well, and I'm just inviting you to just sort of use this for a moment to connect to your feet. So basically noticing your feet, making a decision that you're going to meditate for, let's say, 2 minutes or so. And I like to sometimes keep myself really sort of upright, almost as if I had a string going through my body, sort of pulling me up towards the ceiling, to really sort of put myself upright. So almost like if I can elongate my spine. And then closing our eyes if I feel it's comfortable, and just putting all our attentional energy into the feet. Making a mental connection to the feet, letting go of needing to achieve a particular state, letting go of needing to succeed, but just making a commitment to exploring what's going on in my feet right now. How does it feel to stand? How does it feel to project all the body weight through that small area through our feet? So effortlessly transmit our body weight into the planet. Just giving ourselves a moment to do mindful standing and mindful observation of how it feels to stand firm, almost as if we were rooted. Just making that connection to our feet, and if we care to, bringing in a little image of almost letting go of irritation or irritability that we might have noticed within ourselves, if there is any. Just sort of playfully experimenting with, almost as if we were a lightning rod. Just letting it all go through our feet into the earth. Using this little playful practice to experiment with mindful standing, mindful experimenting with letting go of irritation through our feet. Noticing the connection of this body with the earth, and with an inner smile, experimenting with the image, letting go of whatever irritation may be around, if we can. And then opening our eyes again and sitting back in our chairs. I stopped sharing, and I thank you for your attention, and maybe just opening up the floor with regards to perhaps getting feedback and hearing about the global emotional climate. Can mindfulness save us?
Thanks so much, Florian. Yeah, we've got time. So if people would like to, don't worry about raising your hand on this. You can just do this on the screen, or maybe just speak out. Anyone like to ask any questions or observations from the session? Thanks, Liz.
Hi, Florian. Thanks for that. That was really, really interesting and helpful. I just wonder what your thoughts are really. Are you hopeful for the future about whether mindfulness can change the current emotional climate?
Yeah. I'm slightly mixed about my hopefulness about the climate, because I think mindfulness could, I have got no doubt in my own mind and body that mindfulness can help us deal with anger. Yeah, I've got absolutely no doubt. But I teach mindfulness to a lot of young people who are in their mid-20s, very educated people, junior doctors, and others, senior doctors, and the power of the screen and the phone-based life that we all lead nowadays is just wow. It is a wave that has hit us like a tsunami, and it's really difficult to explain to people how powerful that tsunami is. And that tsunami, unfortunately, is bringing the anger directly through our eyes into our bodies. And it's very, very, very challenging to really explain to people. We need to curate what's coming through our eyes. We need to almost have a filter in front of our eyes before we let all this stuff in. And I need to be optimistic as a mindfulness teacher, but I think we need to send a message about really that we need to have strong commitment in society to basically help us allow to choose what we let into our eyes, and I think we need more support for that. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Liz, but I think we need to be firm.
Yeah, I guess it's about how we do that, isn't it, as well? But yeah, that answers my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you, Diana.
I thought we were going to be talking about climate change, but I'm just sitting here wondering what you think the connection might be between this stuff that's being screened at us, the way that our lives are being curated by something outside of us, and the anger that you're describing, and the lack of connection with the world around us and what's happening around us, and the lack of connect to actually do something, and to engage with the problem, and actually for that to lead into action, which I see as a kind of a separation that we're all experiencing from ourselves, from one another, and the world around us, as Jamie Bristow described it.
Yeah, I mean it's a lovely question, and I don't think I've got total answers, but I can only say what I've learned from Jonathan Haidt, who described the phone-based childhood rather than the play-based childhood, and I think he made the connection that children have their childhood on their phones, rather than in the olden days where you just go out and play and use our bodies, and I think we're all in it. We've got a phone-based life against a sort of a play-based life, yeah. And so the phone-based life that we're having is a virtual reality that we're moving in, which disconnects us from the real problem out there in the world, because we're not in the world anymore, we're in the phone. So I like to transfer that knowledge from our adolescents and children to us all, and it takes a strong message to say no to this. It takes a really strong message to say no to this, and basically say no. We need to make that stopping. We need to make that transition to take ourselves into play, metaphorically speaking, into the real world, and then we will see how the real world is doing. In Mexico, these tree apes are falling off the trees dead because it's too hot. I don't know if you read that today. It was in the news today. I just thought it, and I was like, oh my God, mammals are just falling off trees because it's too hot. People that don't know anything about climate change, I mean, maybe that metaphor will help people. It's bad, but we're not in the world.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. And thanks for that response, Florian. Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? The session today was about emotional global climate change and the connection to the word emotional. I see some heads nodding there, and there was some comments in the chat as well. And obviously, given Florian's answers as well, there is a real deep connection between the two. Maybe maybe not as binary as something that maybe Jamie Bristow would talk about in terms of climate change and mindfulness and climate change in the work that they do there. It would be useful, I guess, to just galvanise any extra feedback if people want to send that in to the MWC via email at any time. I'm conscious that we're now at 1:30, but I do want to just say thank you to Florian. That personally for me, I thought that the statistics and some of the information it used on those slides was fantastic, very, very insightful and very of its time. You know, some really kind of modern stuff that we can work with in some of the conversations and the work that we're doing right now. So I really appreciate you sharing some of that detail, Florian, because that wouldn't have been easy to come by for some of us, I'm sure. So thank you for taking the time to put that together. And also thank you for taking the time for being with us here today. It's people like you that help us to keep these events going. So thank you so much for using this opportunity and this platform to raise awareness around some of the work that you're doing, and for bringing these people together. We really appreciate that. Thanks for everybody to be here. It's good to have your company, and look out for follow-up stuff that will be coming from the MWC in the next few weeks or so. Really appreciate your time and space.
And thank you for tolerating that. I didn't talk about climate change. I talked about it directly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not directly, but yeah.
And lovely to see you, Andy. My old friend Andy is also here. It's lovely to see you.
Lovely.
Thank you all for your presence today.